Welcome, everyone, to the 30-minute Midas touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh WrestlePlex. Now, here is, pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 30-minute Midas touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony. And with me, as always, is the maestro, Mark Tipton.
Well, thank you. The maestro. I do like that moniker. I'll take that one. And it does create some memories for those who are older WCW fans, positive or negative, but we may get back into that a little bit later on. In today's edition of the 30-minute Midas Touch podcast, we're going to do something that I have always been advised not to do. It has always been recommended to me, and it's common wisdom, or, whatever, it's a cliche, so to speak, that we have always been advised that whenever you are involved in polite conversation, there are subjects that we do not discuss. One of those subjects being religion, which is not what we're going for here. It leaves us with the other subject that you do not mention in polite conversation, and that is politics. Well, today we're going to break that rule, because today we're going to discuss professional wrestling politics. The effect it has, what it is, and positive and negative aspects of it. And I'm going to need some help with the positive part, but we're going to discuss that. And so I would like for you to just, for the audience, explain from your point of view, what is politics in professional wrestling, the positive and the negative.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that has to do with money, anything that has to do with any kind of social interaction, there's going to be politics involved. Churches, schools, your work, everything has, inter-office politics kind of stuff going on. So professional wrestling is absolutely no different than anything else. The difference is a lot of our stuff is, to me, there's good politics and there's bad politics. I've been a professional wrestler for 21 years, and you don't get to be a professional wrestler for 21 years and have done anything of merit and not play politics at some level. Because if you don't, you're going to get eaten alive, and if you don't, you're going to be behind the curve no matter what. So, yes, I have played professional wrestling politics from time to time. I consider what I've done good professional politics, good wrestling politics, because my stuff was usually, hey, we don't need to book this guy because he did something detrimental to professional wrestling. He did something bad at a show that I don't want to bring that element into our show or your show or whatever it may be. Bad politics, which I've never done, would be a situation of me going, hey, this guy's better than me, so I don't want you to book him. Right? And I'm going to make up some lame excuse to where you don't need to book him. I'm going to lie about him. I'm going to say things that he didn't actually say, under the radar, so you don't book him. That's bad politics. I've never done that. To me, if someone's good enough to be better than me, then we got two really great wrestlers on the show. Let's build from there. Right? But professional wrestling politics is something that obviously it's the entire dirt sheet industry is based on wrestling politics. So for me, if you want to talk about wrestling politics, it was truly all encompassing when it comes to professional wrestling. So I'm at your mercy to lead us where you need to go on this particular topic.
All right, I like that you made reference to the term office politics. It is something that is real and exists in every, pretty much every endeavor, and we all understand that. I guess the place I want to start is I want to take a little bit longer view. One of the examples of this is the NWA. Now, it historically was made up, there was a booking committee. It was a group of promoters who all worked together and, in cooperation. Now, when you do that, that means you're going to be political that means a booking committee means there's going to be a vote about which direction things go. So now you're talking about literally taking votes. Very political. Would you like to talk about the NWA and the politics of it?
Yeah, like the old school NWA, like you said, it was all these territories, and yes, they were working together to have their own piece of the pie. You know, the negative situation it created was everyone had an agenda. Everyone wanted their guy to be the NWA World's Heavyweight Champion. So that became the politics of it. It was they're pushing for this guy. Of course, Fritz von Erich was pushing for one of his sons. Sam Mushnick was always pushing for Harley. It was just in the Carolinas, obviously the Crockett's were pushing for Flair and Dusty and guys like that. Florida was pushing for Dusty. See, everyone had their own little because if that guy became the world champion and those people already had an in to booking the world champion, already had a relationship with them, then it would pop their houses and they'd make more money, and it was all money related. But yeah, it became one of those things where like when they needed votes, Fritz would get on the phone and call so and so, hey, vote for my kid. I'll send you so and so for 6 months.
Oh.
Yeah, stuff like that. I mean, that's kind of where it kind of starts going into treacherous waters. But at the same time, like, what's he supposed to do? Not play politics? It's happening either way. So you can't really blame Fritz on that situation. But that's where it was.
All right. Mentioning Fritz, there was an example that had come to mind as I thought about this prior to the podcast. There was the historians out there may correct me if my recollection is incorrect, but I seem to recall on an occasion that Fritz von Erich had a show at the Cowboy Stadium. The main event of which, ended up with Kerry von Erich pinning the Nature Boy Ric Flair for the championship, and I believe it was with a backslide. I'm going out on the limb there, but I believe it was
100% correct. Backslide
okay.
It was.
Oh, that it was. But I also seem to recall that in a match I did not recall seeing promoted anywhere, approximately a week later, maybe less, Kerry von Erich lost that championship back, is the way it... Now, if my recollection is wrong, feel free to correct me, but would that be an example of where politics, because of the big event that Fritz was promoting and had going on at the Dallas Cowboy Stadium, it's certainly a big deal for his promotion, that may have been an example of where the politics of the situation played into a decision that the committee made in the direction of the NWA Championship.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the thing with that was obviously, like I said, for years, Fritz had been lobbying for one of the sons to win a title. So when David was on track to be the NWA World's Heavyweight Champion, he was a phenomenal worker. And obviously a lot of people liked him. Harley loved him, a lot of guys like that. So he was probably on track to be the actual world champion, but obviously he tragically died while in Japan. And so it became one of those things where Fritz was like, well, the Von Erichs, still deserve the title. So as a favor to the family, they dropped the title to Kerry. And like you said, Kerry lost it. I believe it was 18 days later.
Oh, okay.
18 days.
Well, thank you. I stand corrected. It was not long.
It was not long at all. It was actually in Japan. I think he went to Japan, did a tour,
okay,
and lost it back. But that was one of those things. It was just for that moment, like you said. It was Texas Stadium, the whole thing, and it was it was actually the memorial show for David. So I mean,
okay,
you see what I'm saying? So like it was a big deal. So like, I mean that's one of the things. Obviously politics played a huge role in that. I mean, what else can you say? I mean.
All right. When you mentioned Fritz and you were going straight down the line of thinking I was on that,
yeah.
and I appreciate that. But I wanted to cite an example. I like to cite examples that the audience, I hope, are like me. I'm a guy from the crowd, and there's things like this I remember, like the fact that it was a backslide. Why that stuck in my mind? I can see it happening right now.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, that was a big deal to me. One of the other aspects that kind of veers into politics, and it's one that may come up a couple of times, but I'm going to cite the example of the AWA for this example. One of the things is the concept of nepotism, and I'm going to refer to now Vern Gagne, obviously of the AWA. In that promotion, his son Greg was featured, and I have oft heard criticism leveled about the amount of spotlight that was given to his son. And that obviously can be political in its nature, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime you get family involved, obviously there's going to be objectivity. It becomes a lot harder. Obviously Greg was someone that was actually pretty well respected, I believe, by the wrestlers, and he was a formidable wrestler. But yeah, the nepotism thing is always going to be there, just because Daddy owned the company. You know what I mean? Like we even had it in Tennessee with Nick Goulas. We had Nick Goulas and his son George Goulas. George Goulas wasn't very good at all, and they would do things like they would make poor Bobby Eaton tag up with them as Jet Set. And, poor Bobby Eaton had to carry George Goulas around all these years. It's stuff like that. And there's that famous story about, I think Harley or one of the world champions came in to work George one time. And, he's kind of throwing punches at Harley, and he's saying, "Daddy said sail. Daddy said sail." Because, it was one of those things where the office had said, "Hey, make sure you sell for my kid," that kind of thing. So you can imagine how the politics of the NBA, the NWA goes, and something like that. That's one of those stories that Cornette has told several times. But yeah, anytime there's family members involved, it's a treacherous territory. To me, it should always be earned. You know what I mean? I was a booker for a company many, many years ago. And basically, this kid, his dad had started a wrestling company, and of course, the kid was, he was catching all kinds of flack from wrestlers, because it's his daddy's wrestling, you know what I mean? So my idea was, hey, let's go out there, let's you put over every guy on the roster, 1, 2, 3, earn their respect, and then we'll go from there. Of course, they didn't go with my idea. He ended up, beating one of the top guys in the company one night. Oh. And it just created a monster. So I mean, it's one of those situations that if you have the foresight about it and you can think about it and you can actually head people in the right direction, you can make it work. But there is bad situations that stem from it, obviously.
All right. Well, I apologize for my groaning interruptions. The situation you described were just sounded atrocious. And of all the people to say a phrase like that to, I don't think Harley Race would be someone I would...
Right. Daddy said so.
Oh, the reaction you might get.
Right.
Okay. In any event, now this is going to be a less than graceful segue, but this concept brings me to the WWE and Vince McMahon. Now, we have seen a very family-involved promotion. Mrs. McMahon, at different times we've seen Miss McMahon, Stephanie, Shane, Vince himself being the champion. I believe he won the Royal Rumble one year. Mm-hmm. I'm stretching my make sure I have my facts straight. I hope I do. Is that something that is... that would have to be very political within the WWE locker room, I would think.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, at the end of the day, it's Vince McMahon's money and he can do whatever he wants with it. That's kind of what this kind of boils down to, right? It's kind of how you make this. I think it's more of a character kind of thing than it is anything else. Like my sons, are 13 and 11. They're on the cusp of maybe doing something in professional wrestling. One's refereeing a little bit right now, but the other's, obviously still just 11. The 13-year-old's 5'9", so I think he's okay rapping right now. But for me, I want them to earn it. I'm not going to give them anything, because no one gave me anything. I mean, you've seen me my whole career. I pretty much had to fight and claw for every monocle of respect that I had to get. So that's kind of what I want my sons to do too. Now, other people have different thought processes about that. Vince McMahon is obviously in a situation where he can push himself, he can push his Shane, he can push Stephanie, he can push, his wife, if he wants to, you know what I mean? And people are under guaranteed contracts, and they're going to tell you, hey, go out there, and if Shane McMahon gives you one left punch, you go down like a ton of bricks, and he's going to pin you. Do I think that's right for business? No, but I'm not a billionaire either. So what do you say to Vince McMahon who does business that way? For me, like I said, I want people to earn it. I think obviously WWE is just a huge landmine of politics anyway. It's one thing after another. And like I said, the entire dirt sheet industry is based off politics and what's going on behind the scenes and who said this and who said that and, that kind of thing.
All right, I'll try to very quickly get through a couple of other examples that came to mind. Now, the first one is going to be the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. And when I criticize him on this, if this is considered criticism, I'm going to cite the things I've heard about him. I'm generally talking about the pre-WrestleMania 14 HBK. One of the criticisms I often heard leveled at him was that he would find a way to, for instance, lose a championship without, getting pinned or, really doing something that elevated his opponent, is the way I'll say it. It's something that he had a habit of doing. And would it be fair to say that that's something that was political in that, A, he was allowed to do that sort of thing?
Yeah, like, the thing is, too, like, Cornette's talked about this several times, too. It's like he doesn't understand why Vince McMahon took as much from Shawn Michaels that he didn't take from anyone else in the company. So I don't know what kind of weird relationship that they have to where that became okay. But at the same time, you have to look at it like this, too. A lot of people want to say, hey, everyone should be treated equally. Everyone should have the same thing across the board. The problem with that is talent isn't equal. You understand? It's Shawn Michaels. He's one of the greatest in-ring performers in the history of our business. Of course, he's going to be given more leeway than the average guy, right? You think Barry Horowitz and Shawn Michaels had the same leverage when it went to coming into Vince's office? Same thing like that. Same thing with me. Like, I've never met Vince McMahon. If I went to work there, I would show up on time, keep my mouth shut, and try to do to the best ability what I was told to do within reason. I'm going to say that because I personally still do have huge standards for myself. But at the same time, you can imagine Hulk Hogan. I've heard many stories of Hogan. He would show up late at house shows and leave early. He would go on third. And he was actually, advertised as the main event, but he would always go on third, and then he would duck out, and then, like, Shawn Michaels and the Rockers were actually the shoot main event to send everyone home happy. So, I mean, like I said, talent's not equal. As much as we want to say, hey, everyone should be treated the same, everyone should be treated fairly, blah, 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 this, it just doesn't work like that.
All right. Well, there's one name that I really can't avoid before we move off the WWE. On the subject of kind of backstage politics, Paul Levesque, a.k.a. Triple H, is a name that I cannot avoid discussing. He is someone, the criticisms I've heard leveled at him often revolve around him burying other individuals. That's the term I've heard used. That obviously sounds like you mentioned earlier about a guy going to a promoter and telling him something about another talent. Do you want to speak on Triple H and his political aspects? Yeah,
I mean, Triple H, from what I understand, he's always kind of had that mindset, like, hey, get in there and get myself in the best position possible and make the best of it. Obviously, it comes from, him marrying the boss's daughter. Was that a political move, or did he really fall in love with the boss's daughter? That's one of the $1 million questions. We'll never know. But for to say that, his career hasn't benefited from it, I don't think he would be the executive vice president or whatever his title is right now if he didn't marry the boss's daughter. I think he would still be involved in the company some way. He might even still be, a big star like he was, but I don't think he would be in the lifetime position that he's pretty much in now. So as far as burying other wrestlers, I think he went out there and he made a lot of guys. And at the end of the day, though, he was going to beat them 1, 2, 3, and that's how you keep yourself strong in the business. I mean, there's plenty of guys that he went out there and he put over too. He just made everything that he did mean something. When he put over Chris Benoit, it meant something. You know what I mean? We remember that. Even something like Shelton Benjamin, when he put over Shelton Benjamin when Shelton first came over to Raw, he was really trying to make Shelton Benjamin the next big star. It didn't pan out exactly, but he tried nonetheless. So, and of course, everyone always goes back to the Booker T thing. You got WrestleMania 19 where, Booker had this big babyface run. It looked like he was going to win the title at WrestleMania, and then all of a sudden Triple H cuts him off and pedigree 1, 2, 3. So I don't know. I mean, to me, it's it's wrestling, and at the end of the day, whoever is the decision maker and whoever the booker is ultimately going to have the final say. So,
All right. I would like to move away from the WWE for a minute because on the subject of politics, I tend to view it from a negative perspective, just from a guy in the crowd, because when I see things in the ring that I think are political, it almost invariably seems to be negative from my perspective. So that's where I'm coming from. And the subject I want to talk about that seemed to me to be intensely political, and it was what ultimately I view as the demise of WCW. I saw examples that, rang out to me as being intensely political and not in the best interest of business in general. And, that company no longer exists for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the problem with WCW, in my opinion, was it was their greatest asset, and it was also their greatest detriment. Their greatest asset was that Eric Bischoff was in charge, and he was thinking outside the box of professional wrestling. And he was able to take the wrestling in a different direction because he wasn't thinking like a wrestling guy, right? Which is great, right? Problem is, he wasn't a wrestling guy. So when it came down to professional wrestling, that's where he made his mistakes. And one of the biggest mistakes he made was giving a lot of guys creative control over their character and their contracts and all that kind of stuff. And basically you created all these little cliques, pardon the pun, he created all these little cliques of different talents that were all trying to, lobby for position to get what they wanted out of the company. Whether it be money, whether it be airtime, whether it be titles, no matter what it was, right? When, Hogan picks up the phone and says, brother, I need that spot, or, whatever it may be, it becomes, like I said, politics, there's good politics and there's bad politics. Good politics is where you're using politics to do what's best for wrestling and the company itself, Bad politics is when you're using it to do just what's right for you, no matter what happens in the company. And I feel there was a lot of bad politics in WCW just because it was so cutthroat. Everyone was out for each other. No one really wanted to work together to get things over. I mean, sure, there's some shining examples like Randy Savage putting over DDP. He made DDP a star, in one night pretty much by doing that. And but like it's few and far between those moments. Everyone else was just kind of doing whatever they wanted to do. Inmates running the asylum.
That's a very good description. Inmates running the asylum. Because and you mentioned creative control, because one of the examples that sprang to my mind about during the waning days of WCW, and I recalled where Jeff Jarrett was the champion and walked into the ring and literally laid down. Now, this was at the behest of Vince Russo, who was there at the time at ringside, and he literally laid down on his back and allowed Hulk Hogan to put his foot on his chest and pin him to become the champion at the time. He was handed the belt and left. They did go on later to say that championship was invalid and Booker T and Jarrett had a match and so forth. But to me, having that played out on a pay-per-view was a political aspect of the business having a direct and intensely negative impact on the product. Would I be fair in that?
Yeah, I mean, and that particular situation is one of those things that, like, there's 18 sides of the story, and no one knows which one's true. And knowing all the people involved, we probably will never know the actual truth to any of it. But basically what it was they had agreed, hey, Hogan's going to put his foot on Jeff's chest and walk out with a title. Then Jarrett's going to win the title, and then he's going to go on as champion for a few months. Then Hogan's going to come back, and he's going to be champion. Jarrett's going to be champion, and they're going to clash somehow, right? Who's the real champion kind of thing, right? Well, apparently Vince Russo screwed them both because when Hogan walked out, he said he buried him and said that's his retirement thing, whatever, and did the thing. It was supposed to be like in a couple weeks, but they did it that night and made Booker T the champion, and it was like, well, what the hell, So it was like who double crossed who's telling the truth. We'll never know, but it's just another one of those unfortunate WCW politic situations.
All right. Well, I'd like to go back a little bit further in time as another example, and you can tell me if I'm off on this. There was a time where Ric Flair was having a contract dispute, and this was the time frame where he actually left and went to the WWE. And that championship he took with him. He took the physical championship belt with him. And obviously that is, you think is that another example of a place where the backstage aspects of their dealings with Ric Flair had a very, negative business impact? And would that be described as political to you?
Absolutely. I mean, at the time, he was dealing with Jim Herd, and like we've said before, Jim Herd has an interview, about almost 2-hour interview on YouTube, and I actually went and listened to Jim Herd's interview. And once you hear his side of the story of some of this, some of it makes a little more sense. I still don't think he should have been in charge of a wrestling company because he didn't know anything about wrestling. But at the same time, he had been involved in the television aspect of wrestling since the 60s, apparently. And I didn't know that. So once you hear his side of the story, it takes on a different light. But yeah, him and Flair and Herd had kind of went back and forth the entire time, and basically Flair said when he was leaving, I'm taking the title with me, and Herd said no, you can't. He said, well, I put down the down payment as champion. Every time you became champion, you put down, I think it was like $25,000 or something like that at the time, and it was supposed to gain interest, until you weren't champion anymore, and they would cash it back out, and the next guy would do it, right? Well, apparently they refused to give Flair his money back, so he's like, well, I'll just take the title, so he took the title of WWE, and that followed the real world champion, and WCW finally had to file an injunction. They started
blurring it
blurring
out.
Yes, the title.
I remember the blur.
Yeah, they started blurring out the title,
the digitized
stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, and that's just one scenario, but I mean, there's so many different ways that politics have hindered careers and things like that. Like Sir Mo, who a lot of people know from our area, it's not my story to tell, but basically, he pissed off Shawn Michaels, and he had to endure the politics of Shawn Michaels in that era, So it's one of those things, like, promoters can be fickle sometimes. You understand? Promoters and bookers and wrestlers in general, we all kind of have an ego a little bit. Obviously, we wouldn't be in professional wrestling if we didn't have a little bit of it, So, sometimes people get their feelings hurt pretty easy, If you go in and disrespect, like, one of my veterans on my show, and you're a young guy, I'm going to tear you a new asshole, and you're probably never going to be back. And then, as a wrestling promoter and as a wrestling booker and someone that's, whose opinion is respected, when other promoters ask me about you, I'm going to tell them what my experience was. That isn't bad politics. That is someone playing politics to help the business. You have to learn that not to disrespect people that are trying to help you. And we've had that situation several times over the years. People who refuse to put people over, or people who refuse to do this or do that, or guys that hit on your wife. You know what I mean? Like, people who steal each other's girlfriends and then they're expected to still do business together. You know what I mean? It's stuff like, it's like there has to be a little bit of a decorum between professionals. If you're not going to act like a professional, then we're going to call you out on it. You know what I mean? And to me, that's good politics. Bad politics, like I said before, is when you're doing it just out of spite, or just for your own selfish gain.
All right, I very quickly want to try to get this in if I can. This is something that sprang to mind as I was watching the pre-show for the most recent TakeOver event. And during that, there was an interruption from off stage, and I heard a familiar voice, saying, let me talk to you. Pardon the poor impersonation. But upon hearing the voice, I know exactly who that is. And, dummy, yeah, or yeah, and all those things. Before walking on the screen, the individual walked on the screen and proceeded to tell me that his name was L.A. Knight. And as an audience member, my response was, no, you're not. I'm talking about Eli Drake. Now, the trademarking of ring names is something that has confused me because it is not universal. If you explain to me the WWE has an interest in being able to trademark wrestlers' ring names, etc., and so forth, I understand all that. But then I see one of my personal favorites, AJ Styles, debut at the Royal Rumble, and he comes out and he is known as AJ Styles. Right. Not a WWE trademark name, at least I don't think it is anyway. That's something renamed that he's held long before, but he's allowed to use it anyway. John Cena uses his real name.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those. It's one, like you said. There's no set rule for it. Like, I feel like if they think that your name that you've created outside WWE is something that's valuable enough for them to bring into the WWE and then use to make money, then basically you retain the value of your name and you can use it like an AJ Styles. There was nothing else they could call him that would make sense right after him being so successful for so long as AJ. But like we've seen it with Samoa Joe, we've seen it with, but even Kevin Steen, to the level that he had success, he had to change to Kevin Owens. El Generico became Sami Zayn. There's been changes. And most recently, like you said, with Eli Drake and the LA Knight thing, I guess I just didn't feel like Eli Drake was either a big enough brand to go ahead and give it the WWE rub by calling him Eli Drake, or they didn't like the name at all. Maybe they think it's too close to Elias. I don't know. There's several reasons that it could be, but yeah, it's always kind of bothered me too, because like obviously, if I got to work there, I would love to be Greg Anthony, because that's all I've ever been, right? So, but to be Tyler Adams, when I obviously have no concernable relationship with the names Tyler or Adams, it doesn't feel real to me, but it is what it is. So I don't know. I'm not exactly sure how they make that assumption.
Well, thank you for letting me get that in, and I will very quickly mention the Dudley Boys being referred to as Team 3D in Impact Wrestling is something I will hate until the end of time. That they were the Dudley Boys before WWE and after. They were always the Dudley Boys. That Team 3, that was an abomination. But I do see that I believe we're over time as it is.
Yeah, we're very close here to almost 32 minutes. Can you believe that? We're going to set new records on this thing one day. But as always, it's been fun talking wrestling and politics with you today. I am the Golden Boy Greg Anthony, for my co-host, the
Maestro.
The Maestro.
Yeah, speaking of WCW.
That's why you were the Maestro, because like politics, you were playing the band. Yeah. The Maestro, Mark Tipton. Thank you and good day.